You probably wouldn't believe me if I told you that this is actually my favourite video to film in the entire year, because it's essentially an opportunity for me to gush about the books I love without anybody here to stop me. And I know you're probably thinking, but it's March. How can it be your favourite if you've left it this long? Bella, where the hell have you been, Loca? Well, until now, I've either been really ill, on holiday, or just working. But all that aside, people of the internet, welcome. Here we are. We are finally talking about my favourite books that I read last year. I read 72 books in the year 2025, and today I'm going to be talking about 9 of these special books with you. At first, I wanted to talk about 10 because top 10 books sounds really satisfying and well rounded, but I take this video very seriously, and honestly, I just wanted to include the only books that I gave 5 star to, because for me, a 5 star book is a perfect book, in my opinion. And whilst I did find all these books flawless, there were some that I liked more than others. So this video is going to be ranked. I'm going to start at number 9, and I'm going to go all the way to my favourite book at the end, which will be number 1. I also want to flag that some of these books are quite intense and heavy, so they may not be for everyone. I wish I could give you happy and funny, like rom-com reads, but honestly, my brain just does not get excited by those sort of books, so here we are. But kicking off, coming in at number 9, we have My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. This is probably not the best book to start with because the content here is so sensitive that I will get demonetized if I go into too much detail, so I'm going to try and use vague language in order to describe this book. But put simply, this story follows the perspective of a 15-year-old girl who becomes involved with her middle-aged English teacher, who he was the one who instigated this relation through some arguably creepy and inappropriate means. And as she's young, she believes that their relationship is a product of genuine love and sincere feelings, and truly believed it when a man almost triple her age meant it when he said, "You're not like other girls." But it's not until years later, when other victims come out speaking against this man, does she realize the extent of her abuse. I read this book almost a year ago now because I read it at the beginning of 2025, and whenever I think about it, I get a very visceral feeling that comes up. Because from start to finish, this book is just purely unapologetically uncomfortable. The author didn't simplify or sugarcoat the characters to make it more palatable for you to read. She didn't write out the graphic scenery to spare you the horrible imagery that you'd rather not know. She didn't leave out the whirlwind of emotions that this girl feels, whether it's confusion or self-blame or guilt or disgust, so those feelings don't end up sinking into you. It's all left in. It's unfiltered, it's raw, it's honest, and overall it is just completely brutal. And this book is just a snapshot of what it feels and means to be a victim of this circumstance. I sometimes really struggle to read books from the perspective of a teenager because I feel like they tend to be written with more self-awareness and less naivety than I think teenagers do have, and that's coming from a teenager who thought that she knew everything at 15. But the author absolutely nails the voice of this girl, because not only could I see my own 15-year-old self with her, I could very much recognize that this girl didn't know any better, and she was very innocent and not self-aware to what was really happening. Also, I just want to flag, because this is the first book I'm mentioning in this list, this isn't me saying that I absolutely love harrowing and devastating books. I just think that this book is very important and eye-opening in showcasing the victim's point of view in abuse and what the long-term psychological implications that can come from this sort of abuse. And it ultimately links to real-life issues such as the Me Too movement, which ultimately changed a lot of women's lives. Even with the content aside, the writing here was very well done. It had a suspenseful plot, intelligent commentary, beautiful prose, incredible one-liners, and overall this left me with such a hatred for that man, Jacob Strain. I swear to God if I ever catch you. But overall, I think this was a very emotional and powerful book that I actually think that everyone should read to understand the experience of victims, because I truly believe that understanding the experiences of an issue is the first step in finding solutions in preventing it for others. Next up, coming in at number 8, we have Notes on a Scandal by Zoe Heller. I was initially excited to read this because the story is based actually near where I live in North London, but my expectations were incredibly exceeded because this was a wild ride. We follow a middle-aged English teacher, and she befriends the school's new young art teacher. However, she finds out this new teacher is actually having an affair with one of her students. By the way, I am very aware that 2 out of the 2 books I have already mentioned in this video includes problematic teachers dating their students. I am honestly not very sure how that happened. I promise none of the other books in this video will include that. If you're a new watcher here, this is a very bad first impression of me, but I assure you that this isn't my go-to genre of books. But anyway, just needed to Put that in there. So, after the scandal with the teacher is exposed, the novel is essentially the drama that ensues, particularly following how this middle aged teacher ends up being an ally to this other teacher that's very clearly in the wrong. It includes an array of themes, including power, manipulation, and the complexity of human relationships, along with the boundaries of trust. I remember this book being so phenomenal. I was just wowed when I finished it. Firstly, the writing itself is impeccable. It is so well done. Every sentence was so intentionally crafted and put together that you can just tell that the author spent so much time to get it absolutely perfect. And the talent that this author has just honestly oozes from the page. Like, it's just so impressive. There were no moments in this book that I wasn't enjoying. Even the slower moments were entertaining because they were so well written. I wasn't bored once. Secondly, the characters themselves are just so astonishing that this alone makes it worth reading, because the character motivations are unlike anything else that I've read. I don't want to reveal too much, but we do follow this lonely, self-labeled spinster woman, and it's so interesting to see why she positions herself as a friend for this other teacher who is so clearly in the wrong. It's very layered, and the characters are so complex and fleshed out realistically that they genuinely feel like real people. I actually picked this up after my Dark Vanessa, and at first I was hesitant to pick this up because I really didn't want another super uncomfortable read, but it doesn't really focus on this teacher's explicit relation with this student, like, at all. It's more about this lonely lady's relationship with this other teacher. The book is just so good. It really does just shift your perspective on what you think a villain is. And on top of it all, the story explores so many other irrelevant topics that give weight to the plot itself, such as class and gender differences, power dynamics, and repressed desires. And probably the one that sticks out the most for me is loneliness and what this can drive people to. A really impressive book that totally surprised me, and I recommend this very strongly. Next up, coming in at number 7, we have If Beale Street Could Talk by James Baldwin. If there's one thing I discovered last year, it's that James Baldwin is one of my favorite writers of all time. His work is truly outstanding and unlike anything else that I've read. For this novel, this is a love story that's set in 1970s Harlem, New York, and we follow a 19-year-old black woman whose fiance has just been wrongfully imprisoned for a crime he didn't commit. And while she's pregnant with his child, her and her family fight for his freedom. And it's essentially a depiction of the corrupt legal system against African Americans in the US, whilst also depicting struggles of young black love in this era. I would say reading this book honestly left me at a loss of words for how good it was. And whilst that is a lovely compliment to the book, it's not necessarily helpful in this video for explaining why this is a great book. But thankfully, I am a yapper, so even though I say that I am speechless, I will still provide the speech. This book was just beautiful and lyrical, and the prose honestly read like poetry. Each word where it was placed felt so meaningful and intentional and carefully decided, and it's truly magical to read something that you have never felt like you've seen before. And Baldwin's ability to capture emotion and find a way to translate that feeling onto paper so you as a reader can feel it yourself is a unparalleled talent, because he was able to capture this feeling of young love between these characters, how tender and hopeful and how real it felt. I basically fell in love with these two characters as well, purely because of how wonderfully they were written. But even with that aside, Baldwin did what he does best, and his powerful social commentary on issues of race in this book is just fantastic. The deep dive into systemic racism and wrongful incarceration, as well as the continuing struggle that black families have to face in America. It's such a biting critique on the injustice endured, which still goes on to this day. Another thing that impressed me was his ability to capture certain group dynamics really well. He can truly stand in the shoes of any person and write for their perspective for you to understand it too. I literally read this in a day. It was so good. I couldn't put it down. I loved it. Next up, coming in at number 6, we have Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn. In case you haven't seen the film or you don't know anything about the story, which is quite amazing considering how popular the film is and it came out over 10 years ago, here we follow the tumultuous journey of a couple's troubled marriage. And on their 5th wedding anniversary, the wife mysteriously disappears and the husband is prime suspect. But as hidden secrets start popping up, the media frenzy intensifies and the investigation spirals. And honestly, it wouldn't be a best books list from me if I didn't include some absolutely unhinged female characters, because they are my loves. Before reading this book, I watched the film around 7 or 8 years ago, so I already knew the plot and all the twists and turns, but I was a bit hazy on the smaller details. So I wasn't super gassed to read this because I thought knowing the plot would make it less exciting and suspenseful. But oh my god, I wish I had read this sooner because it was still fantastic despite that. Gillian Flynn is so excellent at making her characters incredibly complex. It honestly wouldn't surprise me if the author had like a background in psychology, because the way that she uses their background and dynamics to influence their present decisions to such minute detail is actually mind blowing, to the point where all their motivations felt so real and believable. I was like, yeah, I would do that too if that was them. Like, it's almost more shocking to me that these people didn't actually exist and this isn't a real story of sorts. I also love how the author very intimately focuses on the dynamics of married couples through their whole relationship cycle, from the start of the relationship when things are very lovey-dovey in the honeymoon phase, all the way to when things start to get sour and break down and we see the whole aftermath of things falling apart, especially exploring the differences in gender dynamics and the unseen burden that's placed on women. The commentary was just so clever and sharp and witty, and I was underlining so much in this book. In the film, there's a very iconic cool girl monologue that I believe is genuinely the height of the film, and it's what I see videos of most often on like YouTube and Instagram reels. But the book is still worth reading even if you've seen the film, because the book just has so many countless passages like that monologue that I feel like the film just didn't include. So basically, even if you've seen the film, I'd still encourage you to read the book, as it just had way more complexity and extra edge that I think that the film didn't include. And it's just overall a wild ride. I loved it. It's great. Next up, coming in at number 5, we have Down the Drain by Julia Fox. And this book is her memoir where she essentially recounts her life from her wild childhood in Italy to her chaotic years growing up in New York. And she literally leaves no stone unturned. She tells us the messy and unfiltered story of going through poverty, addiction, fame, and motherhood. And she includes all these stories in such detail, including running away from home, becoming a sex worker, and dating Kanye West. And we witness how she survived abuse and heartbreak and the pressures of being a celeb. I don't know if it's because I'm turning 30 next year, but last year I discovered that I really enjoy a memoir. And I find this amusing because when I was younger, I always thought liking memoirs was such an older person thing. I thought I'd always be into fiction. But here we are. I am now at an age where I actually love listening to other people's life stories. But even if you don't really like memoirs, I think you'll love this book because Julia Fox's life is just completely and utterly bananas. I could not physically put this book down. I was actually forgetting to eat because I was just so focused on this book. And I was just aghast about all the things that this woman went through in her life. You think you've just read one thing that's just absolutely bonkers, and you're just like, it surely can't get any more wild than this. And then she immediately does something else that's absolutely bonkers. And the book is basically just like that. It just keeps going. Whilst I was reading this, I was literally texting my family and friends being like, oh my god, then Julia Fox did this, which is something I rarely do because the people in my life don't really care about what I read. But I couldn't stop myself because this book was just so unbelievable. I've never read anything like it. And it's not even just the fact that her life was so like scandalous, which made it good, which even though it did heavily contribute towards it, it was just very admirable to see this woman's resilience and determination to carry on despite the hardships she's endured. And how, despite how the media has painted her, she decided to reclaim her own narrative. Like, what a diva, yes. I also just love a woman that's very unapologetically herself, and whenever a man tells her to do something in life, she's basically just like, no, I'm not listening to you, I'm gonna do my own thing. And in her lowest moments, the honesty and vulnerability that she was able to capture in this book and tell us as a reader was honestly really inspiring. I genuinely love this. It was a wild ride from start to finish, and I just want you to experience that too. Next up, coming in at book number 4, we have The Fire Next Time by James Baldwin. Yes, another James Baldwin book. I wasn't kidding when I said that he is now one of my favourite authors. Last year, I actually had to stop myself reading the entirety of his collection in one go because otherwise I fear that my whole best books list would have just been his works. But in this book, the author basically wrote 2 essays that explore racial issues in America. And he published this book at that time because it was exactly 100 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. The first essay in this book is addressed to James Baldwin's younger nephew that examines the harsh realities of being born black in America. And the second essay is a deep dive into James Baldwin's own personal experience with religion and race, particularly critiquing how Islam and Christianity have both played roles in contributing towards racial oppression. Whilst this book is pretty short, it's just over 100 pages, this is actually the only book I read twice in 2025, as I felt like it was just such an impactful and clever book that I genuinely needed a second read for all to soak into my brain properly. There's just something so special and unique about how that man writes. He's able to capture such specific societal observations that, in my opinion, go very widely unnoticed, whilst at the same time addressing it to the reader in a digestible way, but that it's still engaging. For example, I never considered the way that religion can hinder civil rights in America, especially Islam. And this shed light on something that I had never considered before, particularly in a way that wasn't judgmental. He gives solutions on attitudes and practices that both black and white people can adopt to solve these issues in a way that doesn't come across as preachy or patronizing, and that is such a talent to be able to have. Because this man faced crazy racial injustice, like he has every right to be mad, yet he remains so unbiased throughout his work. I also just think that this book was very relevant today, considering how we are still facing these issues, even though that this book was written almost 50 years ago, which is actually a little sad and disappointing, because how have we made such little progress in that time? Kind of baffling, but here we are. But yeah, James Baldwin, what a writer. I'm so excited to read more of his books this year. Like, I'm sure that there will be another one of Baldwin's books on my 2026 best books list. But this was an incredible read, and one that I will definitely read for a third time at least. Right, folks, time to buckle your seatbelts because we are now at the top three. The bronze, silver, and gold of my last year of reading. And yes, I have been watching a little bit too much of the Winter Olympics. What about it? So next up, coming in at number 3, we have Yellowface by R.F. Kuang. I did not think I was going to rate this book as highly as I did, purely because of the marketing this book had. I could not get off the tube or walk down a street in London without seeing an advert for this book somewhere. And that always makes me skeptical because I'm like, why would a book like this need such a massive push behind it? Why is it being so heavily promoted? But I was wrong. And gladly so, because this book blew my mind. This is a satirical novel following a American white woman who is a struggling author. She writes books, but they just don't sell well. And she's envious of her Chinese friend who is also an author, but a successful one. And this white woman is under the delusion that her books don't sell well purely because she's not from an ethnic minority. So after her friend dies in a freak accident, she steals one of her book manuscripts and she publishes it under her own name, hoping to gain literary stardom. However, the book is actually on Asian experiences, and this story is essentially a whole wild goose chase of this woman not being caught for stealing her friend's work. I have never read a book before where I hated the main character so viscerally as much as I did with this one. Even when main characters are bad, they're written in a way where you can understand their thought process and motivations to the point where you end up low-key rooting for them. But not for this girl. I was literally praying for her downfall in every single chapter. And you'd think if you'd hated a main character so much, the book on a whole would be insufferable to read. But the author put some sort of crack in those pages because I read this in one sitting. I couldn't put it down. And to be able to pull that off is so good. It was so fast paced. I was just rattling through it to see what was going to happen next. The plot was insane. Like, I was generally finding myself screaming in some chapters. It's like when you watch a TV show where it ends on a cliffhanger and you're just like, oh my god, just one more episode. That's what this book felt like until you've just binged the entire thing. Like, every chapter is left on a cliffhanger, so you're just compelled to find out what happens next because you're just like, how the hell is she going to get away with this? I was also crashing out on how like the publishing industry and online book spaces were explored here. There's quite a funny bit where the main character is reading reviews of this book she's stolen from Goodreads and YouTube, and I was well and truly having a break in the fourth wall moment because I was like, wait, is this play about us? It was really entertaining and funny to read from someone who is in these spaces, and obviously if you're watching me or if you follow any sort of book reviewer, you're gonna find it really fun too. And even with the books aside, there is so much commentary on the creative industry in general and how difficult it is to be a person of color in these spheres and how much harder you have to work in order to be recognized, and it's genuinely not talked about enough. Overall, if you found my other books in this list a bit too heavy and intense, which I don't blame you because they kind of are, I would definitely recommend this one if you want a bit more of a lighter and a bit more of a fun read whilst also exploring some quite punchy topics. But this is actually the book that I recommended the most to my family and friends last year, and genuinely everyone that I know that read it after my recommendation said that they loved it and they thought it was a absolutely wild read. Next up, coming in at number 2, we have Educated by Tara Westover. And yes, it's another memoir, and it's made my top 3. I am well and truly approaching 30. This is a memoir that's written by a woman that has grown up in a very strict Mormon family in rural Idaho. Her parents reject formal education, modern medicine, and basically anything that has to do with the government. She grows up knowing very little about the outside world and solely believes what her dad tells her. Like, she literally never heard of the Holocaust until she was like 20. Like, someone brought it up and she genuinely didn't know, and all of her friends thought that she was being insensitive and joking about it, but she genuinely did not know what it was. However, driven by her curiosity for knowledge and learning more about her outside surroundings, she secretly studies and takes exams in order to get into college, and she essentially ends up going into higher education where she finally obtains a PhD. There are some books you read that you just immediately forget the next day. You read it, it stays in your head for approximately 0.3 seconds, and it leaves. But there are other books, which are definitely more rare, that when you read it, that story will stay with you for life. And for me, this is one of those books. I could not believe what this girl went through and what her dad told her, which she obviously believed, because why wouldn't you trust your parents? They're there to protect you, right? And it's so sad how often this girl, along with her siblings, were put in life and death situations because of the decisions of one man that she could not say no to. An example of one of the things that really stuck with me is that she never took painkiller medication because her parents basically told her, if you take this, you will die. And the first time her boyfriend convinced her to take painkiller medication, she was so amazed by it that she was like, this can't be real. This has to be witchcraft. How does it just know where to target the pain? And now every time I take paracetamol, I think about that. I literally take it and I just think about her, thinking, how could you have never have taken this before? And whilst this book does portray the power of education that it has on a person, and how institutions like university can open doors to opportunities that were previously out of her reach, I think this story is more about the bravery to self-educate yourself out of an abusive family. Because there was no obligation for her to leave. She could have stayed there if she wanted to. No one forced her to go to school. But the bravery and the gall and the risk and the determination to leave everything she knew behind, just at the prospect of a more freer and better life, is just baffling to me. Like, I respect this woman so much. It was also just very well written. The author clearly has a natural talent for storytelling. There was no point in the memoir that I felt bored or thought that any of the points were dragging. And also, this is a very popular memoir, and I've never heard anyone say anything bad about this. The last YouTube video I made where I talked about this, all the comments were flooded with people how much they love this book. And for good reason. It's incredible, and I genuinely can't wait to read this again one day. But finally, we're at the last book, the number one spot, my favorite read of 2025. If you've been following me this past year, you probably know which book it is because I gush about this book so often. I literally mention it all the time, and it was also the very first book I read last year. So coming in at the number one spot, we have Betty by Tiffany McDaniel. I actually just want to hold space for this book because it genuinely means that much to me. I actually get emotional when I think about this book for too long, which can't be good, but to be honest, nothing about my reading habits scream normal, so here we are. The author actually based this book off her mother's own real life experiences, and in the novel we follow a young girl who is half white and half Cherokee, and we follow her throughout her entire adolescence as she grows up in a very rural and racist Ohio in the mid-20th century. Her life is very heavily shaped by her father and her heritage, and she's raised in a big family with 7 siblings. This book just covers so much. It covers class dynamics with struggles in poverty and wealth. It covers issues of race with being an ethnic minority in a predominantly white community. It covers gender roles, the fragility of masculinity and the burden of femininity. It covers familial abuse and the generational trauma this leaves for years to come. But it also touches upon some very beautiful things as well, such as humans' relationship to nature, especially how native Indian culture has a particular affinity to the natural world. It also showcases the wonderfulness that dad-daughter relationships can be. It explores how trauma can be healed and that forgiveness is accessible to anyone. This book was just everything. It genuinely had it all. And above all, the writing here was genuinely some of the best I've ever seen in my life. I say this all the time, but just from the first page alone, I knew this was going to be 5 stars. And from the last page, I knew this was going to be my favorite books of all time because I don't think I'm going to be able to find a book as good as this to top it. If you want to feel every single emotion ever, just read this book. From joy to sadness to rage, it just has it all. all. It's a roller coaster, but it's beautiful and ethereal and just overall incredible. I could talk on and on and on and on about this book, but I would never be able to do it justice. The way I feel about this book, I don't think I could ever truly translate into words for you. And that kind of euphoric high that I get with this book is a feeling that I constantly chase when I read. It's kind of why I read. To find a piece of media that somebody else has created that you feel so viscerally strong about because you love it is such an otherworldly feeling. It kind of reminds me of being a kid or a teenager and just being absolutely obsessed with something. I feel like we kind of lose that spark as adults, and it's so rare to find something like this that brings you joy. Yes, I read books in order to expand my horizons and to learn about things that I may never go through in my own real life, but to find a book where you feel like you're learning so many new things, but also like having your soul reflected back at you because it understands you so well is such a crazy feeling. And I know that sounds really woo woo, but this is genuinely how I feel about this book. And it's why I'm recommending it to you, because I want you to also experience this feeling. It's why I make videos and it's why I have this channel. It's because it's such a joy to be able to spread this feeling to others. I adore this book and I really wish I could meet the author one day just to thank her in person because this was just amazing. And on that note of pure dopamine, those are my favorite books from 2025. Let me know in the comments, have you read any of these books? Did you like them as much as I did? If you hated them, don't leave a comment. I don't want to know. But if you haven't read any of these books, please let me know what was your favorite books from last year. I need some inspiration for my TBR list this year. I will also be making a video of my worst books of 2025 soon because trust me, 2025 also did have a lot of flops. But thanks for watching. Sending virtual kisses for those who like and subscribe. Feel free to follow me on my socials. I have a Goodreads where I update in real time what I'm reading, and feel free to follow me on my Instagram. I post more personal stuff on there, but I also post the books I've read, letting you know what they're about and where I rate them out of 10. And thanks so much for being here. This video is always so much fun to make, and I just feel like I've been smiling so much, which is a really nice feeling. I hope you take care, and I will see you in the next one. Love ya. Bye.